Welcome. My name is Sveta Stojcheva. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the political education coordinator for Chicago DSA, and I'm really excited to have you all here. Partly because I'm really excited to participate in this process with you over the next couple of months of defining sort of vision and perspective and priorities for our organization over the next couple of years. We have a lot of power to build and a lot of work to do so that we can win the world that we deserve. And I'm really grateful every single day to be doing that alongside all of you. And so today's discussion is meant to kick off our Towards a Socialist Chicago process, which will kind of culminate at our chapter convention in June. And Melinda is going to tell us a little bit more about that in a second.
Just want to thank everyone again for joining and being a part of this conversation. So a lot of what spurred on this project is the changing political moment and political context that we're in right now. So I'm sure that many people joined. I know I myself joined after Bernie's run in 2016, and since 2016, we saw thousands of people join DSA nationally and in Chicago, and people who were excited and new socialists and started to believe in this socialist vision that Bernie laid out. And so in those four, in a lot of ways, Bernie was the glue for our organization. Bernie brought people together across different cities, across different political tendencies, and across different movements. And it provided us with a lot of direction nationally and locally. And additionally, it spurred thousands of people being a part of different electoral wins all across the country. So Bernie was a really important part of our moment in the first 4 years of this resurgence of our organization. But in the last year, a lot has changed. Bernie lost his election just weeks before the country went into lockdown. We've been in a pandemic for over a year now. And this year has been characterized by economic devastation as working class people lost jobs, lost health care. It's been characterized by state violence and police violence against Black and Brown people across the country, and an inefficient healthcare system as workers and working class people have not been able to have their needs met by the healthcare system currently in our country. So this is all part of our context now. And we've also seen in the midst of all of this devastation that there's also been incredible acts of struggle as people have risen up against the interests of landlords, CEOs, and the wealthy few. We've seen unprecedented workplace organizing as essential and frontline workers have formed unions and gone on strike. We've seen people rise up in historic numbers to protest police violence towards Black and Brown people and communities. And there's countless other examples of the kind of movement that we've seen in the last year. So all this is to say that there's no question that the context that we're organizing in today as socialists is different than the context we were organizing in even just a year and a half ago. And that's really what the Towards a Socialist Chicago proposal and project is about. It's about a way for our membership to come together and everyone in our membership to have an opportunity to consider these questions about what this moment is, analyze this moment, understand it, and propose ideas and priorities for how we move forward as an organization, what kind of work we prioritize, and how we go about that work, given that there is a change in our political context. And so with TASK, our goal is to provide, we're going to have different spaces for basically two things. One, analyzing and understanding the political moment, and then two, proposing concrete projects and tasks. And so today starts a conversation that will continue for the next 2.5 months up until our June convention, which is June 26th, where we're going to be accepting proposals. We're going to be encouraging people to write Midwest Socialist articles, like write what you think, engage with what you think, and have this conversation everywhere in the organization. And then we will compile those contributions, both political and task contributions. And at the June convention, our intention is to adopt a document compiled from all of that member input that lays out an analysis and a set of priorities to shape our work over the next 2 years. So that's our goal here today and the conversation that we're really kicking off. And I can't wait to hear from our presenters and then hear from you all about how we engage with this incredibly important but also unique moment that we're organizing in. So with that, Sveta, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Melinda, for providing that context. And as Melinda mentioned, we're in a very different political moment than we were even a year ago, even 6 months ago. And I think it's really important for us, as we look ahead, to take the time to understand where it is that we're standing, what are the opportunities and challenges ahead of us, and what it's going to take to build towards not just a socialist Chicago, but a sort of socialist future in which so many of us who are currently unfree are free, and that not lose sight of that horizon. And so we're very lucky today to have a fantastic panel to kind of kick off our conversation. So we're joined today by Ramirez-Rosa, who I'm sure many of you, if you're in Chicago, know as our original member of our growing Socialist Caucus and City Council. And I think we all agree that one of our goals for the next couple of years is to grow the ranks. But Carlos was elected Alderman of the 35th Ward in 2015 and re-elected with a sort of I think pretty significant lead in 2019. And prior to becoming alderman, was an immigrant rights organizer in the city and has kind of ties to all sorts of movements. Jesse Sharkey is currently the president of the Chicago Teachers Union since 2018, and the retirement of Karen Lewis. Prior to that, he served as the vice president of the union and helped lead it through two historic, and I don't think it is a sort of overstatement to say world-changing strikes in 2012 and in 2019 that helped kick off the sort of teachers' strike movement and revitalize the labor movement, not only in Chicago, but throughout the country. He's a member of the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, as I know many of you who are on this call and also members of Chicago DSA are. So shout out to all of our teachers and education workers who are here today. And then finally, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor is a name that you should be familiar with if you've come to Socialist Night School, which if you haven't come to Socialist Night School, why haven't you? But she's the author of From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, which we read regularly in Socialist Night School, as well as her most recent book, Race for Profit, How Banks in the Real Estate Industry Undermined Black Homeownership, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History. Those of you in our Socialist Feminist Working Group have probably read her collection of writings on the Combahee River Collective Statement, How We Get Free. But what some of you may not know is that Keeanga lived in Chicago for nearly 20 years and only recently moved away. And while she was here, was part of a number of local movements around tenants' rights, socialist organizing, and of course, organizing, anti-racist organizing, and organizing against police violence. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off because we have some really important questions in front of us, which is a question I'm going to pose to all of our panelists. What do you see as the most significant factors that are shaping the organizing terrain for the socialist and progressive left in Chicago and beyond over the next couple of years? And each of our panelists is going to have about 7 minutes to share their perspective, and then we're going to be in discussion together, followed by some time for all of you to ask questions as well. But we'll kick it off with Carlos. If you wouldn't mind, comrade, go ahead.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's so great to be with over 100 comrades from across the beautiful city of Chicago to have this important conversation this evening. I was kind of thinking about what do I want to share in terms of my perspective in this moment. And recently I've been trying to become better about reading and studying and just learning from those who have been doing this work for a very long time, because the work that we're doing is not new. It's not happening in a vacuum. Generations of struggle have occurred, particularly in this city. So I think it's extremely important that we keep that in mind. And 100 years ago, we actually had the first socialist elected to the Chicago City Council. His name was William E. Rodriguez. He was elected in 1915, and he served as the alderman of the 15th Ward, which was then centered around Humboldt Park. And Alderman Rodriguez was not alone, being a socialist elected to local city office. In 1912, socialists held some 1,200 public offices in 340 municipalities, among them 79 mayors in 24 states. Now, William Rodriguez would only serve one term on the Chicago City Council because when he was up for re-election, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party actually came together to run a hybrid candidate against him. And he was unseated by that hybrid Democrat-Republican candidate. So fast forward 100 years, we now have 5 socialists in the Chicago City Council, and we have one of which has been reelected, myself. And I was reelected with the support of DSA. There's no way I would have been reelected without the support of our organization. And I was elected after taking explicitly abolitionist stances in the Chicago City Council, voting no and deferring the Cop Academy vote, something that corporate Democrats in the city had told me would kill my chances at a political future in this city. So how do we move forward, right? We have a cadre of socialists elected into office. And I guess kind of going back into that question of how do we move forward, I want us to discuss, what are the lessons that we've learned in the past? And socialism in cities has given us a lot of great things. It's given us public transit. It led to the building and expansion of a robust public sector. Socialists did amazing things like creating municipally owned grocery stores, advocating for municipal control and municipal ownership of utilities. And so much of what we love about our cities today was actually advocated and won by socialists in local elected office and their allies in the progressive and populist movement. So when I look at the current fights that we're looking at right now, I think it's important that we always look at the fights that are being led by people, particularly those that have been directly impacted by the issues that they're seeking to address. And I think one of the first things that is critical for us to fight for is the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance, which is the CPAC-GAPA Unity Ordinance. What this will do essentially is it will inject democratic socialism into policing by creating community control of the police. And it will also create a path to defund by empowering local communities to decide that rather than spending more on jails and police, instead we want to spend things on non-police alternatives that will actually keep us safe, like the Treatment Not Trauma Ordinance that our comrade Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez has been sponsoring and championing. And one of the things that I really love about the Treatment Not Trauma proposal, which seeks to divest money from policing and invest it in mental health first responders that will go out there and respond to mental health crises rather than sending an armed cop, is that Alderwoman Rodriguez has been very clear in making sure that this project explicitly opposes privatization. So rather than outsourcing this mental health first responder program to nonprofits or to private service organizations, instead, Alderwoman Rodriguez has been clear that these workers have to be union, that they have to be paid a living wage, that they have to have good benefits, and that they have to have a city pension, and that we as a city should be in the role of direct service. So I think that that's something critically important that we as socialists in office need to continue to champion. I think when I look at the fights that are occurring in our city right now, it's so critically important that we look to ways that we can decommodify housing and ensure that housing is truly a human right. The fight to lift the ban on rent control has advanced so much thanks to the work of DSA. And I think now is our moment to continue pushing that. It passed the House Housing Committee, which was something that was unthought of a few years ago when a motley crew of activists picked this issue up. So we've shown that people power has been able to get us this far. And I think we've got to continue to flex that people power to show that we can get even further and actually lift the ban on rent control and actually impose rent stabilization and rent control policies to keep people in their homes. But in the interim, while we are fighting to lift the ban on rent control, we have to move forward on issues like just cause for eviction. Just cause for eviction would be a tremendous change that would help keep people in their homes and would help make sure that landlords aren't just kicking people out from one month to another because they've just decided that they want to rent to somebody else, or it's time to empty out the building because it's going to be turned into condos. Mayor Lightfoot committed to support just cause for eviction, but after she heard from the real estate and development lobby, which gave her $800,000 plus in campaign contributions, she changed her tune and broke her promise. So I think it's critically important for we as a socialist movement to stand with the poor, to stand with people that are facing eviction in this moment, particularly during a pandemic, and demand just cause. There are no good jobs on a dead planet. And so it's critically important that we as socialists continue to push for issues that will address climate change. And I think critical to that is moving forward on enacting a Department of the Environment here in the city of Chicago, again, expanding the role that the public sector plays in addressing the crises that capitalism creates. And we have to continue to tackle austerity by taxing the rich and making sure that we're doing things like creating a municipal bank. I can't think of anything more socialist than a municipal bank to really make sure that those dollars that we're paying and holding collectively are working for us rather than the Wall Street and banks. So when I look back at the history of the municipal socialists or the socialists in local office and their project and where it failed, in some instances we see that they failed to tax the rich. Almost consistently we see that when they lasted for many decades past kind of the height of the initial municipal socialist movement, is because they failed to pose a serious threat to the capitalist class. And in many instances actually voted and adopted a position that they would be content with solely having local elected office and dealing with things on the margins rather than taking on the heart of capitalism. And most often, we also saw that they failed to build a multiracial working class movement. So we know that the same way that William Rodriguez was targeted, for his reelection, they're gunning for us this time around. When I was up for reelection, I was outspent 3-1. My opponent received $100,000 from one deep-pocketed landlord that owns upwards of $75 million worth of property in my community. The realtors and development interests threw in another $200,000 into that race. We have to expect that our comrades on the Chicago City Council, my wonderful colleagues, my sisters and brothers that I love serving with every single day, they're going to face the same exact challenge. They're coming for us. So we already know that the FOP has been talking about targeting us specifically. We are on a hit list. They want us out of office because they know that we pose the most serious threat to continued racist policing in this country. And so I think our task as we look at how to grow towards a socialist Chicago is we need to, one, think about how do we solidify our victories? How do we build upon them? And how do we ensure that we embrace issues that are informed by the grassroots, that are coming from the bottom up? I don't think that we as an organization right now or as a handful of socialists can be dictating to the working class the issues that they need to be fighting for. I think that we need to identify non-reformist reforms that are rooted in mass people's movements. We know that the fight to stabilize rent and to win rent control is rooted in a mass movement and is a popular demand. We know that defunding is rooted in a mass movement and is a popular demand. So I think we need to continue to lend our voices to those causes and be the extension of the grassroots in elected office to really subsume, our advocacy in city council to those issues that we know will build working people's power while also creating transformative change while we advocate for these ordinances and these pieces of legislation. And I think we have to continue to focus on how do we shift the balance of power between the working class and the capitalist class. That has to be the heart of everything that we do. And then democracy, right? Socialism is democracy and democracy is socialism. So I would love to see us democratize everything and decriminalize everyone. As a socialist in elected office, I just want to say that I'm so proud to be in this movement with you. I'm so proud of this work that we're embarking on to come up with a vision of how we move towards a socialist Chicago. And I guess what I'm saying is that the people are kind of already telling us where to focus our energy: on housing, on climate, on ending racist policing, on tackling austerity, on creating good jobs. I think that the issues are already out there; they're already percolating, and it's up to us to show that socialists will not only stand with working people, but will deliver for working people, will govern in the name of working people and alongside working people, and that in that way we can build trust and work towards building that multiracial working class movement that will not only help us be reelected, but will help us win the meaningful and sustainable change that working people need.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And I am right there with you on the importance of learning from history. We'll go to Jesse next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sveta. And I just first thanks to the Chicago DSA for inviting me. I've been red baited by the Chicago Tribune, by the Wall Street Journal, and others, and attacked for ideas that I don't even hold, but almost never invited to actually talk about political ideas on a platform. I guess it's just easier to caricature than actually have a conversation. So I'm very happy to be here and have a chance to think a little bit about, what are the tasks of the left, and what a sort of a thinking socialist make of what's going on. I will say that I'm a trade union leader, and the CTU is a union that advocates for social justice. That's something which is in our Constitution. Um, uh, but we're not a political party, and I am a socialist, but I'm here in a personal capacity, and that's something that I do want to make clear. And I think it's useful to start by thinking about the difference between kind of trade union organizing and political on the one hand and political organizing on the other. Unions, at our best, represent all the working class people in a given workplace, or in a given industry, hopefully, and warts and all. And not all workers come into political conversations with backgrounds or ideas or what have you that are based in solidarity. A lot of our experiences of life in a society are very atomizing. People think about, obviously, what it means to have a paycheck that supports their family and what it means to look after themselves or their own interests. And there's plenty of examples in the history of working class struggle in this country that are ugly. And I just think we have to own it straight up. Talking about racist unions, segregated unions, talking about unions that have very misogynist past, and engaged in sexist practices and all the rest of it. And and I'll say a little bit more about that because I also think we've seen the opposite as well, and that's been very inspiring. And I think for the CTU, you've seen the CTU be involved in a lot of really inspiring struggles. Whereas, political work, which I think is extremely important, tries to look back at the history of working class struggle and pick out the instances in our history where we've been the most successful. Not the part where black or white ethnic strike breakers are brought in to break a strike, or where the boss used kind of fear of immigrants to turn us against each other or whatnot. But the instances where we've been able to stay united and win things that help workers. And so the political organizing, this idea that it upholds in some ways the best parts of our tradition, the most militant, the most effective ideas, this becomes important. And it might be that in difficult periods of time, not everyone ascribes to those ideas, but that's the importance of political organizing. And so, the question was sort of, what are the significant features shaping the socialist left right now in Chicago? And I guess to me, I look at that question from the perspective of someone who's been very involved in questions about fighting for educational justice, fighting around the schools Chicago students deserve. In some ways, I look at that as a with a trade union lens, and I would say that the one piece of what makes this moment right now so important is that the problems with the way the system runs for regular working class people are posed very starkly. Think about education. Think about just education in terms of what does it mean if you're sending your kid to a private school like lab school. You go to a school it's a unionized school, by the way, but incredibly well resourced. Beautiful facility. You have social workers, you have nurses in your school, you've got small classes, you have lots of resources to educate your children. The work of trying to nurture that next generation of young people is very well looked after in lab. I think lab has 11 librarians at the lab school. Now, contrast that with what public education looks like, for working class people, especially Black and Latino people who make up the mass base of the public schools in Chicago. In all the schools in Chicago's West Side, we have 4 librarians. Typical Chicago school doesn't have a librarian. To the extent they have a library, it's a room with some books in it. but not actually someone whose job is to curate, and try to unlock the experience of reading and literacy for young people. Barely exists. Typical CPS school doesn't have a full-time nurse. So even in the middle of a pandemic, but typical a nurse goes to 5 schools a week. So if you're sick, you better be sick on Tuesday because the nurse isn't there on Wednesday through the following Monday. We're talking about schools whose physical plants a lot of times are degraded with roofs that leak and updates that haven't been made, and an internet that is spotty at best, etc. And really, like, if that were the end of the story, we could say, that's an old story. That's certainly been true. Anyone who knows anything about the history of Chicago schools, you go back and you still see them in some neighborhoods. When the Great Migration was at its boom, and there were a lot of Black people moving into Chicago from the South, they didn't open up white schools to Black people, and they put these trailers, these temporary school structures in parking lots of schools, and they're called Willis wagons, kind of named after the Benjamin Willis, who was the superintendent of schools at the time. And you can still see the mobile units. You go around to crowded neighborhoods. Now it's mainly Latino schools in Latino neighborhoods. But so it's an old story that there was racial segregation and very different kinds of conditions in schools. But what I think is inspiring about this moment right now is that we've actually seen mass struggle. As people have challenged those conditions, and so I became part of the leadership of the CTU coming out of a rank and file movement, where there are a group of teachers who organized in our workplaces against school closings, or a series of experiments that were sort of trying to close or turn around or do other kinds of, nasty experiments, for lack of a better word, especially on Black schools in the city of Chicago. We formed a group that opposed that. Were able to take over leadership of the union and have been able to lead some very effective strikes and struggles against that. And so I guess I think that, I'm going to try to be respectful of time and not go on and on. But I think that if you're interested in changing society for the better, it's really, there's the question of organization, which is important. It's important that we have a way to organize around each other. That the other side represents organized money. We have to represent organized people. And then it's a question of politics and having some clear political ideas. And I feel like right now is as important of a time as ever to do that. And so, and I think that is accentuated in a lot of ways by the pandemic. I think the racial and class divides in our society right now are stark and as brutal as ever. Where if you live in a neighborhood where there's crowded multi-generational housing, where people work service sector jobs, and people didn't have very good access to healthcare to begin with, sky high death rates, really an incredibly traumatic experience with the pandemic. And you saw people who are middle class in the neighborhoods that had to be white near the lake didn't have that experience at all. And so you have movements of, why can't my kid go to school? Whereas other neighborhoods, 70 or 80% of the parents are keeping their kids out of school because they're not yet vaccinated and terrified that people, they've seen lots of people die in their neighborhood. And so at any rate, I don't think, to my way of viewing things, I don't think you can have socialism in one city. I think that to get the things, think about it from the point of view of schools, we need to have funding. In a lot of places, it's the poorest cities and towns that have the least funding, and yet need the most. And so, I don't think our vision is narrow like that. I think it's a broader vision about the ability to share resources that lifts up working class people's agency and power. But I think that the idea is that we do need to have movements and political organization in the place where we live. And that's the thing which I think that gatherings like this and people thinking about political ideas are really important for. And so, I hope to be a part of that conversation, and I hope that our movements and our ideas continue to grow.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we're very glad to have you as part of this conversation. And we'll go next to Keeanga. Please go ahead.
Hey there. I also want to extend a thank you for the invitation to come talk, but really for me, to come listen when Alan asked me about doing this, I was interested less as a place for me to come, talk about what to do, um, and more as a way to be able to plug into a discussion with other socialists about, really trying to understand what's happening right now, what the opportunities are, and what the challenges are. So, I have some of my own insights about this, but I'm really interested in hearing what you all have to say and what your experiences have been. So, with that, I have a few sort of general kinds of observations, at least things that I'm thinking about right now. I think the first thing is I think that there is a tremendous sense of, or at least in November, December, January, February, uh, there has been a tremendous sense of relief that the Trump administration came to an end. Especially towards the end of that administration, where there just seemed to be a kind of crescendo of insanity by the end of Trump's term, that I think that there was a huge amount of relief that the administration was coming to an end. But I think saying that, the underlying factors that gave rise to Trump in the first place have not gone away. And I think part of that is coming to grips with, in some ways, with things that uh, the Democratic Party in particular did not come to grips with over the course of Trump's administration, but that the Trump phenomenon did not just come out of anywhere. That this was an expression of what I think we can describe as a profound crisis in American politics, and uh, uh, the lingering effects of profound crisis that began in with the 2008 financial collapse, which I think about as a kind of watershed event in American politics. And so, what it means is that Biden could certainly win the election with the largest turnout in, I think, 100 years. But the underlying factors that gave rise to Trumpism, are still intact, even though the success, I think, of Biden's campaign speaks also to the power of the movement that emerged out of the uprising last summer. So, in that sense, I think something that some socialists at least have talked about for quite a while still remains a true feature of U.S. politics, that it's extremely volatile, where we have both the experience of the right growing, and we have the left growing at the same time. I do think that when we look at uh, or try to understand what are uh, some of those underlying factors, I think that we can see their kind of reemergence after what I think has been a honeymoon period of sorts for Biden. But I think that over the last few weeks, after the passage of the kind of CARES 2, the 3 million, I think, was it $3 million, 2.9 trillion rescue package, that the kind of underlying issues of both economic and social questions have begun to reassert themselves. And so I would say at least some of those factors are a continuing growth in inequality. We've all read about the exponential growth of billionaire wealth during this time of intense crisis, the growth, also the simultaneous growth of poverty, the continued efforts to undermine trade union organizing and unions themselves. I mean, the most egregious example is was obviously with Amazon and the Bessemer campaign, but I think even the attacks on teachers and teacher unions and trying to force teachers to return to school on conditions set by the employers is an example of that. Obviously, the continuing issues of police abuse and violence, the attacks on trans youth, where we have Republican legislatures across the country introducing draconian transphobic legislation, um, attacks on immigrants, and Joe Biden's naked walk back of his promises on the refugee cap. And then there's still the ongoing issues with the democratic distribution of vaccine and questions about access. And we've all seen the kind of continuation of racial disparity in access to the vaccine. And so there, you know, the looming threat of eviction. The eviction can continues to be kicked down the road with no actual resolution. It just keeps getting pushed back further and further, which just only means that the debt accumulation experienced by millions of people in this country continues to grow with no resolution on the other side. And a similar issue is that of student loans, the hot potato that no one wants to hold and just discard, which Joe Biden obviously has the legal authority to do so. And so I think that these sort of underlying issues are part of how we can understand the kind of crisis that Trump arose out of, but it's also how we can understand this is the crisis that Bernie and Bernie's politics also arose out of and gained tremendous tremendous traction. And so it means that one, I think, is understanding, you know, what does this, what does all of this add up to politically? Because I think that in some case, you know, some of this can be confusing in terms of what it is that we do. I know that there have been more broad debates. Is this the end of neoliberalism? Because the Democratic Party has embraced spending, and you know that creates some question about then how do socialists orient themselves in this particular moment. And you know, I think that trying to get to the kind of underlying issues can help in that sense. And so I don't have specifics about what to organize around. You know, partly because I'm not in Chicago. I obviously keep up quite closely. I probably know more about Chicago than the city I live in, which is Philadelphia. But, you know, I think that what people have talked about in terms of opportunities for campaigning and organizing obviously exist. There are no shortage of issues. And I do think that it's one thing to look at the Biden administration from a national perspective and come to some conclusions about what the nature of the honeymoon is, you know, because I think his approval rating is north of 60%. And, you know, I think that there's some relief that there appears to be a functioning federal government and that there appears to be some effort to use federal money to staunch crisis, both, you know, on a local and statewide basis. But I think you see the real tenuousness of what the functioning of the Democratic Party on the local level I mean, I think in cities like Chicago, where I'm not sure what Lightfoot's approval rating is at, where that is at now, but this has been really months of protracted crisis, whether it is confrontations with the teachers union, which the Chicago Tribune rolls out that poll every year. Who do you trust more, the mayor or the union with the future of your kids? And they lose the poll loses every single year, and that begins to have political reverberations in her administration. The fact that she diverted an enormous portion, $280 million of CARES money to policing, the seeming inability to follow through on any of the things that she ran on, any of her campaign promises. And so there are replications of these kinds of local crises and failures, crises of governance in cities across the country, which have created much more substantial openings, I think, for continued organizing and political intervention. But I think beyond the kind of specific campaigns, of which there are an endless number, that organized socialists can engage in, I think now is a really crucial time for political discussion and political engagement, and political and comradely debate about the issues of the day. I think one of the problems that the left has had is, if you think about the way that, I've written about this in a few different arenas, but if you think about the ways that the right has basically uses the Republican apparatus to project its ideas, to shape public opinion, to intervene on what it perceives to be the key questions of the day, the left has no such vehicle. The Democratic Party is a big, mushy tent in which its leadership tries to manage the different factions or constituencies around elections to keep everyone together in such ways that you end up with just a muddled kind of political message that seeks to offend the least number of people. So you get Joe Biden in his endless search for the soul of America. We want unity. All of these vague positions that don't really evoke anything, and that don't engage with what the questions that people actually have, and certainly make no effort to politically challenge or intervene on questions concerning that have had resonance on the right. And so that means that there are lots of political questions, debates that just don't get taken up, that just don't get engaged with. And so I think that if there are ways that socialists can organize some of those discussions, can be at the center to whatever extent possible of organizing those kinds of debates, of organizing meetings around these key political questions that don't always have to end with the next campaign or thing that we are doing, but that actually take up the political issues with the goal of trying to, change minds, to win people over to socialist politics, to a socialist viewpoint of the world, and to see that as a kind of ongoing political endeavor and project that if you're talking about 2 or 3 year plans, that you think about that over time. So I guess to me, one of the key issues is how do we project our politics and ideas, certainly in combination with political organizing and campaigning, but also just on the basis of trying to win people to a worldview, trying to win people to a political analysis and framework and understanding of capitalism at this point, its relationship to exploitation and oppression, and why people should be socialists and should join the socialist movement. That's it.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to spend a couple of moments here. I think that was really great, and so I'm going to do my best to sum up some of the ideas here. And something that I heard from all three of you is that to some extent the demands are clear, or the issues are clear that are sort of shaping working people's lives. We are seeing a kind of growth of consciousness around policing, around housing, around the climate, and around inequality in particular. And increasingly, we're seeing that rising by working people in their workplaces for broader and broader demands. Although I might say that not to anywhere near the degree that we need in order to be able to win some of these demands. And I think that also creates some opportunities for some pretty concrete campaigns. As Carlos mentioned, there's a lot of things that we could be fighting for in Chicago around treatment, not trauma, around just cause eviction, around rent control, all of these things that are kind of familiar to us. But at the same time, we have this task ahead of us, which is to change the balance of power between the capitalist class and the working class. And that's not a small task. And I just want to name a couple of the obstacles that I heard in this discussion, including the fact that, the capitalists are onto us. They see us building power, and they're certainly going to to come out in full force in the next election and wherever else, through union busting, wherever else they can flex their considerable muscle. We also don't have a lot of outlets for getting our ideas out there to people that don't already kind of exist in our orbit. So how are we able to bring our ideas not just to people who are already politicized, to those of us who are already kind of interested in socialism and DSA, but to the masses of working people, and actually bring them into our movement. So I think before we move into Q&A, I would love to hear from maybe Carlos or Jesse, if you have some thoughts about that last point that Keeanga made, which I think was really a good one about bringing these political discussions. I think it's really important that we're having them as an organization and as a movement, but how do we bring these conversations not just to those of us who are already on the left, but to the rest of the members of the union and the other people who work in the schools and the parents, and Carlos, to the constituents in your community who might not even think to identify as socialists, but who are touched every day by these things. So I'll go to Jesse first. And then
I'll give a quick idea. I think Keeanga's right about. I mentioned political organization, and I think she's right about the role of the Democrats. I mean, Chicago's a one-party state, right? The person who wins the Democratic Party primary wins the election. I think workers need their own political party. I do, and I know that's a mouthful, and historically that's something that's easy to say and hard to do, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. And to the extent that we can figure out how to build movements that where we don't kind of just assume that workers don't have the ability to have political ideas, and where we can take that seriously and build places where those discussions can take place, and have the ability to sort of control our own fundraising and our own contact lists and our own ability to build organization in neighborhoods. I think that's something that we should be aspiring to do.
Thanks so much. Carlos, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that, the socialist movement, at least in the context of Chicago, we've won a lot. We've helped win a lot of things. In my ward, we have a 100-unit all-affordable housing development that would not have been built but for this socialist in elected office joining with people fighting in the streets to make sure that the Emanuel administration's plan to turn that into a luxury development did not go through, and that instead it became affordable housing for the people in our community. Working with Daniel Espada and with Alderman Byron Sixto Lopez, we've actually helped pass additional regulations on developers to make sure that they can't do things like harassing low-income homeowners to try and get them to sell. That is now illegal in the city of Chicago, thanks to Byron Sixto Lopez. We've done things like make sure that if a developer demolishes naturally occurring affordable housing, that they have to pay a $15,000 fee that then helps fund new affordable housing in the community. So is this socialism? It's not, but it's helping to move the needle in the right direction. It's also helping show that government can and should intervene in markets, that it should regulate them. And so it's helping us to kind of shift the conversation and shift the balance of power closer to where we would like it to be. And so I think we have to claim these victories. And I think too often in the left, we love to say, well, it's not the perfect thing that we always wanted it to be, right? Or it's not good enough. And so I think we have to become better at explaining how it is that we're succeeding in governing, how socialists being in power is to the benefit of working people. Certainly, I know how socialist Jesse Sharkey being in the power of CTU has been to the benefit of CTU, has been to the benefit of the rank and file. So I think we have to start spelling those things out to people and say, look, the things that you love that are happening in your community, they're happening because people that are identify as socialists and are organizing as socialists are working to get it done in coalition with liberals and with progressives and with many people of many different backgrounds. And the things that you would like to see happen, like a Green New Deal, like Medicare for all, things that are wildly popular, it's socialists who are fighting for them. And so I think if we go out and have those conversations and really focus on not being a small little clique that yells at each other because we didn't say the thing the right way, or we didn't take the right internationalist stance, or we have the wrong position on something, and instead really focus on governing. This is our project. We are engaged as DSA in an electoral political project, and that shows that we have to show that we can govern. And I think that means that we have to ship posts less online if we're going to try and get there and win the support of the masses of people who need us to really stand up for them in this moment.
Thank you, Carlos. I agree that it's really important that we turn our attention to those masses of people. And I would love to hear a little bit of what we can do to back up people like Carlos, people like Byron, who are in electoral office and kind of doing the work of governing, since we know there's a lot of obstacles that the capitalist state places in our wake, and that are also going to grow the more power that we have. I think we can see the recall campaign against Kshama Sawant in Seattle as probably something that we can expect to happen here if we don't strengthen our forces. So I think I'm going to throw that last kind of question here as that obstacle of how do we build our power? Like, what is it going to take in order to push back against a challenge that's always been quite strong? But I think the more that we have these victories, the more that we claim them as socialist victories, the more pushback that we're going to get. So if Keeanga or Jesse, either of you would like to speak to that, what is it going to take outside of the seats in the state that we can capture?
I mean, I don't, I think that there are probably a couple of ways to look at this, and I'm not totally sure, but I think that having one is having a strong division of labor. Like if this is something that is reasonable to anticipate, then there should be like a group of people who are dedicated to thinking about strategies that have to do with defending reelection strategy, defending various candidates who are up for reelection, and imagining what all of the kinds of attacks would be, and that that is a work that people dedicate themselves to trying to counter organize around. And I think probably related to that um, involves how do you mobilize people in a given community where th- there are people who are in the Socialist caucus have been elected to understand the record and what is at stake when there are coordinated efforts to remove people from office, either through recall campaigns or through electoral campaigns. And, what is the nature of what kinds of strategies are necessary on a community wide basis to uh, both mobilize people electorally, but also to turn that into an opportunity to engage in some of the political conversations, debates that we've been talking about. I think Carlos is right in, um, saying that socialists should certainly take credit for the political um, campaigns that we engage in, the spoils that come from those campaigns, to explain in our own terms why there is a kind of orchestrated backlash from developers and the liberal right, in local politics, who all have their Black Lives Matter signs, but don't want the black neighbors, don't want low income neighbors, and that sort of thing. And we have to be willing to engage in political fights around these issues. The only thing that I would say beyond that is that I don't know if the narrowly focused campaigns on particular legislative issues, local issues, um, is all that we're trying to do, right? I mean, that's an important part of what we do. And it's also, we often engage in these campaigns, or should engage in them, to win, of course, but to also create a platform upon which we can also talk about the bigger issues, the larger political issues that are important, not just for the sake of having a debate for debate's sake, but I think what Jesse says, that we're not going to just have socialism in one city, and most of us have not come to socialist politics, or become socialist because of a single issue, or a handful of municipal issues. I mean, I think that we understand the earth is in an existential crisis, and that uh, these are huge political issues that can't be resolved on a local level. And so the question then becomes, how do we use the local work that we're engaged in to enter into a broader political conversation about capitalism, about socialism, and about social transformation that must extend beyond the boundaries uh, of Chicago, and that necessarily opens up the door to bigger, broader discussions about politics. So politics is an art, right? And we have to be able to do both, which is to deal with the day to day organizing questions that take up all kinds of specific things on a local level, but we also have to see its relationship and connection to these bigger questions that motivated all of us to become socialists in the first place, because we're fighting for a different world, not just a different a different city or a different ward.
I'll,
I just
I'll add Yeah, thanks, Vita. Two good points. One is I don't really think that the people who really have economic, social, and ultimately military power in a society are going to give it up because we beat them by one vote in an election, or frankly, whether we beat them by one vote in some legislator or city council. I don't think that's the way it works, and that's why I think that if we really want to have transformative socialist politics, we have to be organized in workplaces, as well. And you the workplace is the nexus of workers' social power. It's where people come together. It's the place where we produce the things that society needs, but it's also a place where we relate to each other, and when we're brought together. And there's a reason why the socialist movement is focused on that idea. And I just think that there are a lot of things about right now that make it hard to organize at work. It's hard to get to a majority. But I don't think that we should view the current difficulties as a reason to make a theory about why that isn't actually necessary if you really want to transform things. It's hard, yes. As the Keeanga mentioned the example of Amazon Bessemer, and we figured it out in the past, and I think we're going to need to figure it out again. And I definitely think the socialists have been part of that work, and that's been some of our most important contributions, to the victories that our side has had. And so, I just would add that into the theory, as well, that for people who are looking to, organize and transform our society, people should think about, participating in a union if they're at if they're at a place where there is a union, and if there are a place where there isn't, think about organizing one. And that's an important part of our contribution to what makes our society go forward.
I think that's a really important note to end on. Is it's really crucial to our understanding of where our power is, as the working class, and the kind of power that it's going to take to be able to maintain some of these political victories. And I think we have I think maybe to get to a point that Carlos made earlier, there's a lot that we have to learn from previous struggles, including a really rich history of militant socialist labor movement that we can kind of look forward as a guiding star, one that brings all of these other struggles against racism, against patriarchy into the broader struggle. And I think that's a fantastic kind of place to move into Q&A. So I'm going to ask everybody if you would like to, we'll take a few minutes here to take some audience questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please type stack in the chat as Andrew has just demonstrated. Thank you, Andrew. And I'll take maybe 2 or 3 questions at a time and then send them to the panelists just for if there's overlapping themes. But we'll go to Andrew first. Go ahead, comrade.
Hello, Andrew Carkey, him. The question that I'm curious about is that we have a lot of really compelling causes to organize around, but something I think becomes overwhelming, especially when it talks about bringing in new people who aren't as politically activated, is how does this sort of become a restorative or a healing, or at least just not a space that's just draining? Because I feel like it's really easy to be like, we've got all these things to do and we want you to do flyer here, sort of like do this, like calls out at this point. So I'm wondering, how do you sort of think we can grow the socialist movement, or just like our organizing energy in a way that doesn't come off as like taxing or as sort of like burning out people, both new people and the already existing members?
Thanks, Andrew. And panelists, if you want one of the questions that you hear particularly, feel free to message me. But I'm going to go to Brian and Nimesh, and then send the questions your way. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, hey. So, thinking about Chicago, like if we want to build working class power, we need to like have a working class. And something that makes me feel a little despairing sometimes is like the fact that the working class of Chicago is being pushed out in such massive numbers that it makes you go like, what's happening to the very base that we need to win in any arena? It doesn't just mean electoral. But I think electoral is a good example. Like as we see redistricting coming up at the ward and state district level, we might be losing seats because the only population growing is like rich whites, right? So I just wanted to hear people's panel's thoughts on like how do we kind of confront that somewhat terrifying macroeconomic like development that I don't think can be just fixed with like, oh, we'll do some affordable developments or rent control or whatever.
Thanks, Brian. We'll go to Nimesh, then we'll send the questions and we'll take a couple more. Go ahead, Nimesh.
Okay. My question is, what non-electoral strategies can we use? Because, I mean, I'm sorry, it just the electoral process is extremely corrupt. And I know there's good and decent politicians, but when you're dealing with this overwhelming power, that's very difficult. So what can we do besides electoral politics?
Right, maybe we'll start with that last question because I think it resonates a little bit from Jesse's last statement. If that's okay, I'll throw it to you, and then we can talk a little bit about displacement and then kind of building a sustainable movement.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that we should organize unions and, in movements. I think that we should, if we're in unions, we need to figure out how to like have them become democratic places that, that fight in terms of the broad interests of working class people. Not all union politics are the same, obviously. Um, I would also say that like the first question was sort of about how like in terms of how do we attract people into the movement that we're trying to build. I wouldn't I would be careful about trying not to counterpose things that aren't counterposed. And the truth of the matter is that there's an awful lot of work for socialists to do. I think that what we need to have a place where people can discuss politics and be involved in the world of ideas and in the world of like thinking about how to make a better society and have that be a collective project that is mutually supportive. And it's a big conversation inside the CTU. There's some people who are really interested in electoral politics, and it's been a strength, frankly, of our union. And there's other people who are interested in trade unionism in a more kind of direct way. And frankly, you don't have an effective union unless you've got a lot of people who are interested in that. So, but one thing we've tried to do is to sort of have people aligned. And maybe we're not all like perfectly lockstep, but like we're not going that way either. We're kind of pointing in the same general direction. And I think that like that's true for the kind of organization we're trying to build. It's like let's think about this as a collective project. A lot of things for people to be involved in. We'll lift up talking politics, and we won't all necessarily insist on there being only one thing to do. And that's why that's part of what's exciting about being an organization is that we can do a lot of things.
Thanks, Jesse. Keeanga, I'm wondering if, since so much of your recent work has been on the question of housing, you would like to speak to that question of displacement and how that affects our capacity to organize politically. Oh.
Sorry. I think that there's a couple of things. I did want to say something about the electoral politics. I don't,
please,
because I don't think anyone would propose that we just do electoral politics, and even for people for whom that is their main area of work, I don't think that any of those people. I mean, I'm good friends with Rosanna Rodriguez, and I know for a fact that she and I'm sure the other comrades who are in office don't believe that electoral politics are the lasting solution to all of our problems. It's a political tool that we are using to both take advantage of being able to get an elective office for all of the reasons that Carlos enumerated, but to also have a platform to talk about our ideas and to try to expose a broader number of people to socialist politics. And it can be very fraught and complicated and produces big questions and debates, but that's politics, and that's what it means to be that's what it means to be engaged. I think probably and I'm not in DSA, but I would venture to guess that most of the work that the organization is involved in is not electoral politics, but the people are involved in trade union work. People are involved in all kinds of solidarity campaigns, depending on where folks are at. You know, some people are taking up issues around policing, around immigrant rights, around all sorts of things. And so I think the question is to the comrade who raised the issue about burning out. I think is we have to think about the division of labor, but I think it's also about and I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if we ever figured these questions out on the left, but I think that uh, politics is important as well, and creating the space to think about and assess and evaluate and to study is also important to keeping people engaged, because most people come around socialist groups because they want to understand more, they want to know more, they want to be active, but it's like a delicate dance of being able to do all of these things. And just on, I think the question about evictions and dispossession and displacement is a huge looming one that again keeps getting kicked down the road without any significant resolution. And so I think that networks are around evictions and really trying to strategize around responding to the eviction crisis is going to be important um, for the left in the coming months, especially as these moratoria get suspended. When the kicking of the can stops. I mean, it's not hyperbole to talk about the 12 million people who are facing displacement because of the eviction crisis, and I think that affords many opportunities to develop anti-eviction networks to be able to respond directly to this crisis and develop full-scale campaigns around this eviction crisis, and marshaling the resources both federally and locally to cancel the rent, to cancel the debt. And they can figure out how to pay these landlords, but you know this is a huge looming catastrophe that demands like a coordinated political response to.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to first Haley, then Anna, and then Andrew for our next couple of questions. But go ahead, Haley.
Hey guys, thank you all for coming and speaking to us today. I have a question that's broad. Maybe Jesse can answer it a little bit more specifically, but I've been thinking a lot lately about the differences of opinion of union members, right? So, as socialists, right, we're talking about towards the Socialist Chicago, growing the socialist movement, and then also just growing socialist ideals, right? So people might not necessarily consider themselves socialists, right? But they might consider themselves people who believe in healthcare for all, for fair housing, for this, for ownership of the things that we need and want and deserve, right? And so my question is fairly simple, but I'd just like to hear your ideas, which is basically, how do we all get on the same page, specifically in places where, we're like a union where we're brought together by, our work. But we have different opinions. This has come about for me because of what's been happening in Minnesota. I lived there for 5 years, and there's huge disagreements amongst the rank and file about whether or not the National Guard should be allowed to do things like stay in the labor building, things like that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, ideas. Thanks.
Thanks, Haley. That's a great question. Anna, go ahead.
Good evening, comrades. Actually, I think Haley, our questions speak to each other a little bit, because I've been thinking about how in the last year, where economic precarity and the division of resources and actual material position to power is becoming starker and starker as people have lost their jobs, as like the healthcare systems failed each other, and like rich people and like the ruling class can, motor off to a private island and like never wear a mask. And it's being flaunted in our faces, first of all. But I think it's really summed up by the slogan of like, the jobs are essential, but they don't consider our lives to be essential. And so there's that raising awareness. And I think that is such a big opportunity to connect that to a more material socialist analysis and getting into that and like building a more sustainable movement going forward, having these things be more oriented in a socialist communist future and orientation. What are just like, I am just curious of like, if y'all could share a moment of connection, like between community members that might not share the same politic, but have the same class interests, where that can grow. Because I think that's really where we need to keep our focus at. And that's where my work, I know, is.
Thank you, Anna. And we'll go to Andrew W. for the last question in this round, and we'll kick it to our panelists. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged as an older socialist. I've been around for quite a while, and this active interest is really important to the whole thing. And because I think we are in crisis, what my question has to do with is I hear very little discussion in the left at all about these new technological means of production that we all understand that Marx put a lot of importance, without saying that it was determinist to what level the production was at, whatever steam engine or whatever. It didn't control everything, but it was certainly a factor. Yet I don't hear very many leftists talk about what this is doing in the real world. I mean, I see things that I've never seen in my life, like the homeless situation. When I came to Chicago 30 years ago, it was nothing like this. In other cities, it's even worse. And this, to me, it represents the abandonment of the industrial worker, the jobs that used to be able to get. I talked to one of my friends from the Young Patriots today. Used to be able to walk in one door, get fired, and have another job in the afternoon in Chicago. This is no longer the case. And we see, when I look at a situation like Adam Toledo, I see like he's representative not only of a young, Mexican-American kid in Chicago, he's representative of a whole generation of children that don't really have a place in this technological future they're making. So can we talk a little bit about that? What are the impacts? What are the implications to organizing at the point of production when so many workers are eliminated?
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Andrew. Like how are we in a different kind of moment, not just politically, but also technologically? I'm going to go to Keeanga for this first opportunity to answer, since I know she has to jump off. And thank you so much for being here and for your insights. And then we'll kick it to Carlos and Jesse if they've got something else to add.
Yeah, my 5-year-old is staging a riot now. So let me just say these are, I think, critical questions. I think particularly the question about what is the nature of labor right now, what is the workforce, and the question about solidarity and uh, how do people connect beyond you know, over differences and different, you know, workers who have different um, positions and different um, uh, understandings, different consciousness. You know, I think this is for me. These are crucial questions that have to do with why, for me, the emphasis um, on politics is so important. And I think that sometimes in the you know, when Andrew is talking about we have so many things to do and there's so many different committees and there's, you know, a million different directions people can be pulled into, that there's always certainly a danger of that. But if there's not a political foundation and understanding of the questions that motivate people to become socialists in the first place, and the questions that confuse and confound um, individuals and people in the movement itself, then, you know, it makes it difficult to move forward. And so, to me, this is how do you, I mean, I think some of it is not just about the right socialist argument. You know, some of it is about the way that struggle sort of illuminates what we have in common. But even that can be complicated in a world of Fox News and MSNBC, which is like the absolute inverse of what Fox News is, just for liberals. The commonalities get obscured, and they can be hard to understand. And you know, I think that it means that where there is struggle, I mean, that's why it's so important for socialists to be involved and to be present, not to tell people what to do and how to do it necessarily, but to how to put this into a larger understanding of why these things are happening. And, you know, I think solidarity is really about being there for other people's struggles, even when you may not be directly impacted by whatever the particular issue is. And I know people have been doing that and going out to the Adam Toledo protest and, you know, the protest of last summer. And then within that, making an argument about how these things are connected to us. You know, the issues of policing abuse and violence, of course, are born directly on Black and Latinx working class communities. But you know, when our government spends almost $100 billion a year to keep its racist criminal justice system intact, that impacts all workers, you know, and when their abuse directed at Black and Latinx people is legitimized, then when they turn those same abusive forces on picket lines and organized labor, you know, it makes it harder to respond to if you haven't responded in the first place. And so there are ways, you know, I think that some of these connections and relationships are elucidated through political engagement. And so for me, that is why um, that's so important, that we don't reduce our meetings to a bunch of tasks and responsibilities and sign up sheets and that sort of thing, but that we talk about politics and we talk about these questions, these, you know, political issues. We should be having meetings. Is this the end of neoliberalism? Not so that we can be right, but so that we can talk about what is neoliberalism, what is meant, what is meant by that. And when we have those conversations among ourselves, then it helps us go out and talk to other folks. But we should also be having those meetings with other people, because that's what people want to hear. And there's no place to hear that. There's no place to actually, if you look at like the polls of what people want and where like public consciousness is at, it is so far to the left of anything that is offered in politics, in what you see in the newspaper, in all of that. And so there's nowhere for people to either get their ideas affirmed or challenged or to take them further. And so, that's a problem. And as a huge political organization, the DSA is in a particular position to help provide that space to talk about politics and history and what is happening in the world, and to connect that to strategy, tactics, to connect it to political organization, a vehicle to actually do something about the things that alienate and piss people off. And so, it's tricky to bring all those things together. It's hard. It's very hard. I certainly don't deny that, but I mean, what do they say? That's the work. That's the work that we're supposed to be doing. So, again, thanks for the invitation to join you guys. I wish I could be on longer, but I've got a meeting every night. And it's my birthday tomorrow. So
happy birthday. Thank you for
starting now.
Thank you so much for being here.
And have a good meeting, and invite me back again.
Oh, gladly.
See you guys soon.
All right, that's fantastic. And I would be remiss to not make a push for why political education is such an important part of our work as socialists. I think if I miss this opportunity, then I can't step down immediately. But go ahead, Jesse.
This to Anna and Haley, how do we build politics in our union? It comes right off what Keeanga said. We talk to each other. The CTU is the most radical union in the city. It's also the most democratic, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Let me tell something that might surprise people on the call. CTU meets once a month. The big meeting we have is called our House of Delegates meeting. Every school in the entire city, there's 550 public schools plus about 35 charter schools that are organized in unions into the CTU. And every school sends at least one delegate, sometimes more depending on the size of the school. Like Lane Tech, a big school like that, sends multiple. And then paraprofessionals send delegates, and school clinicians send delegates. And we had 600 people at our April meeting. And as you probably know, there's been a lot going on. We've been fighting about these school reopening plans. But none of that might surprise you. But what should surprise you is that at that meeting there were not one, not two, but 4 different resolutions that came from rank and file members that were about various political kind of questions, including one about racism against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And so this resolution came to the floor of the meeting, and there was a full political debate in which probably a dozen different rank and file members spoke about that resolution. Some of them raising the question about whether the resolution should be talking about nationality, diversity, and ethnicity. Other people talking about the importance of the resolution. It went through. People talked about should the wording be amended, and then there was a vote, and that happened. And then there was also a sort of official resolution about what we were doing about the school reopening process. but so 5 different debates. We had over an hour of just political debate in this House of Delegates meeting in the middle of all this other stuff going on. And, honestly, I do think that's at the heart of why the CTU is an effective organization, is that members talk about politics and debate it and take the set of ideas seriously. Where a union, for example, has a theory of racism. Very, very consciously, we talk about like how our union has to take a position on racism. Has to have a position on exploitation. Has to have a position on social justice. Like these are a series of things that we talk about, and I think that like that's at the heart of what we should try to do when we're doing political organizing. I will say something quickly about the question of technology, which is that, I think we take truth from facts. And if at some point it stops being the case that there's a working class and that like smart robots do all the work in our society, then we're going to need new theory. But that's not where we're at, and it won't be for a while. I think the boss replaces labor with labor-saving technology, and that's been happening for a long time under capitalism. And in the first instance, that definitely disrupts the way the structures of a class are built. But in the long run, that actually makes us stronger. Right? It means that our labor has more power to shut things down, not less. So I think that like there's a lot of elements to sort of our theory of how society works that remain really important. But what I do think is that there's a lot of spaces for new organizing, and as a person who's been in this movement for a while, I'm learning a lot from new people who are more native speakers about technology. Think about the way people are organizing on digital platforms, on Twitter and whatnot. And I continue to be inspired by the possibilities that changes in a society open up. As long as we keep, talking politics, trying not to counterpose things that aren't counterposed, continuing to try to support each other, keep organizations strong, think about the importance of workplace organizing and build socialist politics.
Thank you, Jesse. I don't know, Carlos, if you had anything to either of these questions, or if we can grab Diego and Dennis's questions and wrap up here. But I'll throw it to you first.
Questions?
We've got a couple more questions from Diego and Dennis, but if you wanted to say anything about bringing folks together that maybe share interests but not politics, I know that's something that I'm sure you've come across in the ward talking to people.
I think in the interest of time, let's take Diego and Dennis's questions, and then maybe I can touch upon some of them.
Great. Great, thank you. All right, we'll go to Dennis first and then close with Diego. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, appreciate the panel and the conversation. I guess my question is there's so much going on in our city. What do people think are the next tasks for us as socialists? I mean, we live in one of the most segregated cities. You look at the response that people have had around the murder of Adam Taleo. There's certainly polarization on one level, which I think speaks to the division and some of the racism that has plagued the city for so long. You have, cities that are, how do we come together on some of these questions? And I guess my question is like, how do we, what do people think is the next steps for socialists to be in our organizing spaces over the next year, whether it's in our union spaces, in our workplace spaces, our education spaces, our community spaces?
Thanks, Dennis. Diego, how about you?
Hey, everybody. Thank you for sharing the space with us. My question is basically about how I think that right now, historically, we're in a strange and unique kind of environment, especially within the movement, that there's a lot of like institutionalization of the various sort of spheres of like struggle, right? So obviously the institution of the electoral sort of, bourgeois governing body, right? That our elected socialist leaders like occupy, right? There's like the heavy institutionalization of labor, right? I mean, CTU is one of the most amazing and influential unions in the world, but not all unions are like CTU. Some of them are very, very regressive. Some of them are very counter to the kind of things that we're trying to push for. Also, somewhat of a new development, that's an old argument on the left, right? But something that's kind of new is the institutionalization in the nonprofit sphere, right? The socialists of the 60s and 70s, there's such a plethora of radical organizations that have changed the world and changed the movement in such an amazing way. And now I think a lot of that space is occupied by this brand new, burgeoning, not brand new, but like relatively new in the historical sense, burgeoning nonprofit sector, right? And so like all these areas of struggle are heavily institutionalized. And the problems that you see in some of these institutions, I think, lead a lot of people, especially on the left, if I editorialize a little bit, to make judgments about even the way we structure our own organizing. People who may be against sort of like institutionalization or against certain kinds of like structures and creating, quote unquote, hierarchies or whatever in the spaces that we have. I don't necessarily agree with that, but like I can see why people have grievances where they see, union drives end up the way, let's say the trade unions have gone, right? Or elected officials end up, down the road, they were progressive at one point and then ended up eaten by the system, et cetera. And now in the nonprofit sphere, you see a lot of this work occupied by them. So basically my question is, how should, let's say, we as socialists posture ourselves or position ourselves with like this kind of institutionalization of the movement in so many of the spaces, right? Both within and without. Obviously, we want to be inside these institutions and change and reform them, but say for like organizing as socialists outside, say a Chicago DSA, how our institution as a movement interacts with institutions that are around us, right? So I'm just kind of curious how you all think about that dynamic, especially people who occupy these institutions, right? But to help people outside, say, to influence, like social movements, to influence labor unions, for instance, because there's a lot of racism in labor unions, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you see ourselves positioning in this new kind of institutionalized movement?
Thanks, Diego. I'm going to kick it to Carlos first and then go to Jesse.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of connectivity between a lot of the different questions that have been asked. And one of the things that I have in my office is an effigy of Lucy Parsons, who lived in the 33rd Ward, what is now 33, at the border of 35. And written across her chest is her famous quote, "Never be deceived that the rich will allow you to vote their wealth away." And so I agree with Jesse and Keeanga that, we're not going to have socialism in one ward. We're not going to have socialism in one union. We're not going to win socialism by, just winning one election. But elections matter, right? Elections have important impacts in our community. And I think that there's actually a lot of parallels if we look at the history and the story of CTU with our current electoral socialist project, particularly the wins that we've had at the local level, at the ward level. I don't think that CORE would still be, at the leadership helm of CTU if they hadn't shown their ability to deliver for their members, if they hadn't shown their ability to govern the union and take the union to ever greater levels of success. When you look at who ran against Jesse, it was the members' first slate. And inherent in that members' first name was the criticism that they were lobbying against CORE, right? CORE is fighting this big socialist lefty fight at the city level. They're spending all our money on politics, but they're not prioritizing the members, the teachers, right? That's the same criticism that we hear against socialists in elected office. Rosanna and Carlos and Byron and Daniel, they're too busy fighting the big fight. They're out here calling for Medicare for all and for these big lofty goals, but they're not focusing on the potholes on the street. They're not focusing on the issue on my block. I don't think that Jesse would have been elected president of CTU at the most recent election if he had not shown that he's able to deliver on grievances, right? If there were a bunch of members in the union that felt like the union was too busy playing politics and not focused enough on the grievances, the day-to-day paperwork that teachers have to fill out and the things that they're facing, I don't think that they would have won with such a sizable majority, right? Because a lot of people would have agreed with the members' first line, right? They would have said, I feel neglected. And so I think similarly, it's important for socialists to engage in those projects at the local level once we are in elected office. So yes, let's use our elected positions as a platform. Let's use that elected position to shift the conversation and move it to the left. But let's also not lose focus to the day in and day out things that we have to be able to deliver. And let's also be able to connect the way that Jesse and CORE have been able to connect our broader political fights to the things that will actually improve our lives, right? The repeal of CTU winning back their collective bargaining rights, right, was the proof in the pudding that this electoral work and this political work and this project of building power as a union in a way that it hadn't before, right, was in the best interest of the members. And so we have to show that to the people in our districts. In a way, we have to view the community as the union that we're trying to build, right? We have to get people bought into this idea that if you elect a socialist in office that's going to organize, that's going to fight these bigger fights, right? And that we're gonna do it collectively as a community, that it's going to be in their best interest. And at the same time, we have to be able to fix the potholes and deal with the day-to-day issues. So elections absolutely are critically important. And if CORE had not won the CTU election and won it again and again, I can tell you that I wouldn't be in elected office, Rosanna wouldn't be in elected office. So it's important that when we're elected to these positions of power, that we take them seriously and that we actually do what's needed to do to solidify our wins, to grow them, but also that it helps build our power. In terms of that institutionalization, I think it's important then to just remember what we're there to do, right? And it's not just to deal with the potholes. It's not just to deal with those day-to-day issues. It's to actually be part of that broader project and that broader movement to shift the balance of power between the capitalist class and the working class. And we don't have to look back to history to see success. We can see it in this hemisphere right now. The movement towards socialism, right, was a successful electoral project in Bolivia. They were able to retain power after a coup and come back to power. And a lot of that has to do with the broad mass popular support that they had within certain sectors of the indigenous community, of the working class. So I think the question is how do we build a political project that has its roots in our communities, in the organizing that's happening within the grassroots? And in some ways, we're trying to do that in the 35th Ward and in Chicago by working with those organizations that are working at the grassroots level, but also at the grass tops level. So on the issue of homelessness, in my ward, we get complaints all the time about people that are experiencing homelessness. And one thing that's important to note is that we've actually gone out and spoken to the folks that are homeless in our community. And what we found out is that some of them are actually day laborers. Many of them are actually building houses for other people during the day, but they don't have enough money to pay rent in a city where we don't have rent control, in a city where we don't have social housing. And so they have to live underneath the viaduct. And we've had meetings between neighbors that complain about homeless encampments and the people that live in those encampments so that we could humanize each other, so that we could build an understanding. And we've been working with the Chicago Coalition of the Homeless to advocate for the big structural changes, right? They're kind of a more grass tops, advocacy organization, but we've been working with them to fight for more funding for homelessness, which is the solution for homelessness. But we've also been working with the Chicago Union of the Homeless, which goes to homeless encampments and organizes with people on the ground. So it's a Herculean task, right? Because we have to be fighting on all these fronts. We have to be organizing on all these fronts. But I think if we're able to kind of show people that socialists and the socialist approach to leadership is delivering for them, we then can connect that to the broader question of why should you be a socialist? And really what leads me to socialism is that belief that housing needs to be a human right. Healthcare needs to be a human right. And it's not just where we need to go, but it's also how we get there that makes me a socialist, because I now understand that if we're going to win these things, the only way we're going to win them is through the working class holding and flexing power, but also the only way that we're going to keep them is by the working class maintaining that power. The social advances that were made in the latter half of the 20th century were completely obliterated by the capitalists, right? They were able to take back so much of what the working people had won. And so I think that if we do that work at the community level, if we have the meetings between the folks that are homeless and the folks that are not, if we have the meetings with the liberals that want to talk about homelessness, I think we can begin having those conversations about what's it actually going to take to address the issue of homelessness in our community. And once we begin to address the issue of homelessness, what's it actually going to take to make sure that we never get back to where we are at right now? And it's socialism, it's worker power, it's democracy, and it's having things work from the bottom up, having that socialism from below. That's what's really going to win us the change that we need, and it's going to sustain it for the long term.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Go ahead, Jesse.
I'll be quick. Thank you, Carlos. That was an inspiring summation. What do I think? I think that, I don't think it's so easy to talk about not-for-profits. I don't think you're going to get paid to overthrow capitalism. I think you get paid to, and that goes for not-for-profits or for-profits for that matter. I think that at the heart of our vision is organizing, is self-activity, the emancipation of the working class, act of the working class itself. That's that's sort of the theory, and I think that remains true. And I think for that reason, it's not so easy to answer Dennis's question. I hope that people get involved in organization, and we know some things about it broadly. We're fighting exploitation, which is all around us. We're fighting racism, which is one of the central features of the way the society is organized. And the way those movements look, it has to do with groups of people getting together, talking, figuring out the theory, and being involved in it. And I look forward to being part of the struggles side by side with all the people on this call, and and all the rest of us.
Thank you so much. And I think, let's take the work of building power seriously, and let's take the work of understanding our moment and our politics and bringing those conversations to our neighbors and our coworkers seriously, because that is our task as those of us who are lucky enough to have found ourselves in this space and have a vision for something. So I'm going to kick it to Melinda, who's going to give us some next steps. And if those of you who looked at the agenda at the beginning are probably laughing at me right now at my ambitions, but I'm going to let Melinda kind of let us know what's next for thinking about towards a Socialist Chicago. And then if anybody wants to stick around and have some discussion afterwards, we can keep the line open. And this has been recorded. We probably have to clean it up a little bit and get it up like on the Chicago DSA YouTube, but it will be out there. So good question, Ryan. But go ahead, Melinda. I'll have you close us out officially with our kind of next steps here.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm so excited to have been part of this conversation with you all, and I just was vigorous setting notes during our panelists speaking comments, and I really appreciate what was discussed here. So I just want to emphasize something that came up multiple times in this discussion, which is the importance of talking to each other, and talking to each other as a political act and a way for us to develop our ideas and our analysis, taking perspectives, not necessarily because they're right, but because they help us develop our ideas. And so that's really what this process for the next 2 months is about. So there's a couple key points up here on the slide. I really want to highlight the next red square, which is going to be May 15th. And it's all about reading our chapter in the multiracial working class. And then in June, there's going to be another red square where we get to review the document that the drafting committee puts together based on member input, and we're going to discuss that document. So I really want to highlight those forums. The next really key date for this process is on the 25th of April, a form for people to nominate people to be a part of the drafting committee. The proposal put in front and voted on by the membership in April was that we would have a 7-person drafting committee. If it's 9 and I'm forgetting, then somebody correct me, but it's all there in the document that we voted on. So there'll be a form for people to nominate folks for that. And then there's also going to be a form for people to start submitting proposals, so our rationale and ideas. And we are not at all asking that people submit their perfect ideas or the ideas they think are the right answer, but that by putting ideas, putting a vision out there and engaging with each other, we can actually have these conversations. And that's what this process is about. So I highlight April 25th, want to highlight those red squares. And then finally, just want to say that this proposal, this project is going to be as good as the membership makes it. If nobody engages, we are going to vote on a very slim document. If people take this process and own it and run with it, like it's theirs, if our membership really, really takes this as an opportunity to bring forth ideas, then this will be an incredible document, and could give us an incredible space to begin these conversations. So ideas does not start and end here. We encourage people to in your branches, in your working groups, in your campaigns, in your committees, to have open conversations about towards a socialist Chicago. What does that mean? What kinds of projects or things do we think we need to engage with building to build this with the key goal in mind, as has been stated over and over and over again? It's not about an individual campaign. It's not about winning office. A specific point. It's not just about building the union. At the end of the day, as socialists, it's about building socialist power, building working class power, and challenging the capitalists and our enemies at every turn. So that's our goal here. And that's what this process is to encourage. So I'll hand it back to Sveta with that. And I can't wait to see what people in this chapter come up with and to read and be a part of the conversation with you.